Perfect, thank you. So thank you again for being here. With all sincerity, I know how complex and challenging the times are that we're living in, between balancing your personal life and your professional lives, carving out an hour to reflect on and learn a little bit about sustainability as it relates to the hospitality and tourism industry is a choice that you're making. So thank you for choosing to be here to explore this topic. And just wanted to say, as always, with respect to the complexity of a topic such as sustainability, I'm going to do my best to share some insights, some tools, some resources, some perspectives that I've gathered over the last number of years as somebody who has worked in the hospitality and tourism industry, and also somebody who's worked in the education space, and really tried to summarize some of the key points related to sustainability here. But you'll know if you've listened to anything that I've put together or read anything that I've written, I really do like to lean on the experts, and there are lots of differing opinions and perspectives in this presentation because they become resources for you as we're going through, and depending on what we're talking about, if something resonates with you, you'll see links in the bottom of the slides, and Jillian will ideally be putting those in the chat boxes. There will also be some videos that we'll review together that just again give perspectives from different kinds of organizations. And the goal really here is to give an overview of how important sustainability is in 2022, but also, like I said, to make sure that you are filled with supplementary resources. So if something works for you, you can dive deeper right into that. So great, let's get rolling. Just wanted to set the stage here and start this discussion with a bit of a personal reflection. I think regardless of where we come from, we're all managing through this life on our own journey. And so this is a little bit about me. So I was born and raised in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. And I think my journey into the hospitality and tourism industry, but also into a respect for sustainability, came from my youth because the beautiful thing about the city of Vancouver, and I think it connects with a lot of what we're experiencing now, is this is a natural environment that has somehow found its way to be interwoven with a big city. I'm not going to comment on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. And it's a thing that I experienced firsthand. And so I was always consciously aware of how important the environment is within our daily lives, but also then how much the economy and a city structure and a city culture impacts that environment. And I think that that really set the stage for why I was always so inquisitive about sustainability and wanting to learn more. And quite frankly, the more you dive into learning about and understanding sustainability, the more you understand, on one hand, the simplicity of sustainability means that we want all the resources that are available to us now to still be available in the future. But then the complexity of how we achieve all of the things that we want to achieve in our personal lives and in our professional lives, and still find a way to keep this whole human and planetary experience woven together. So, with that, I want to share a couple of influential people and perspectives in my lives that I think really informed my approach to sustainability. So, here's the first. So, top right hand corner there is an image of my grandfather, Frank Baker. A fairly common story, I suppose, in that he was a World War II veteran and came back from the war and started his career at that stage in his life, and got into the hotel and restaurant business out in Vancouver. And you can just see from this incredible little flyer here that the generation that this represented, because ultimately the model of the hospitality and tourism industry, hotels, restaurants, tourism, transportation, all of the different pieces, really is a model that was handed down to us from generations of business people. I think there's one little line right towards the bottom there, just above that little flyer that says Georgian Towers Motor Hotel. Western Canada's most luxurious, most unique hotel. It's just such an interesting statement. This is a very fairly small hotel in terms of today's standards, but this was a very influential perspective in my life. The business of running hotels and restaurants. And on the other side of my family was a little bit more leaning towards the environmental world. See, this the gentleman in the middle is my uncle, and he was one of the founding directors of a group that was called the Don't Make a Wave Committee. It was formed in the early 70s, and they went on to found this organization that's ultimately called Greenpeace. And I share those two perspectives with you because I think they're really symbolic in terms of what sometimes seems to be a conflict between the business of hospitality, hotels, restaurants, and much more, and the environmental conscientiousness that really centers around organizations like Greenpeace and just that kind of entire way of thinking. And I like to reference this quote. This is a quote by Bob Hunter, another very well-known and gone journalist and you know ecologist, I suppose, and somebody who was also a big founder of Greenpeace. He always articulated the name of that organization as somebody flashed two fingers as we were leaving the church basement, which is where they were having their meetings, and said, "Peace." And another one of his colleagues says, "Let's make it a green peace." So, in the context of why sustainability matters, if sustainability matters to you from an environmental perspective, and there's much more to discuss, this to me is a reminder that an organization with the force of Greenpeace was ultimately started by some people who were very specifically focused on a cause and pulled it together and created a really big momentum that carried generations into the future. So, whatever you're dealing with right now, whichever perspective of this issue or any other issue, if you feel like you're that person who's constantly pushing that boulder up that hill to try to move your cause forward, just remember that at the end of the day, individuals coming together, united by their beliefs, and in this case, their values, have the capacity to create multi-generational positive impact changes. So that sets the stage for understanding the background and why I came towards sustainability. Let's talk about the agenda for today. So we're going to cover a lot of ground. When Karen and I started talking about designing this presentation, it was how much value we can possibly add within the short amount of time of an hour or less so that this awareness, knowledge, skills, resources are available to you in your daily lives, in your daily careers, and within your businesses. So we've done our level best to get as much high quality content in this presentation. I want to start by defining sustainability, again, from the perspective of the experts. I want to share with you some sustainability programs that are available to you as individuals within the hospitality and tourism industry, programs specifically designed to help businesses understand and become more sustainable. We're going to have one challenge, one task, one focus. If you go away from this presentation and do one thing centered around your contribution to sustainability, we're going to try to focus on reducing our collective carbon footprint, and we'll dive into what that means and how we do that. Hard to imagine in 2022 talking about the sustainability of the hospitality and tourism industry and not thinking pretty hard about our people. So I want to share one piece of work on the concept of just decent work and economic growth. And if we have time at the end of the presentation, I want to do a quick refresh on reinvention, because regardless of where you're coming from, the simple nature is we're trying to change the way we've always done things, because the way we've always done things have led us to a place where we are contending with some pretty dynamic forces. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's get into defining sustainability. As shared at the beginning of the presentation, while I think a default perspective on sustainability tends to go towards the environmental, and yes, certainly the environment is a big part of it, there's a lot more to the sustainability discussion than just the environment. So let's start right away by going to the experts. This is a really great definition of sustainability that's worked for me for a number of years. In 1987, the United Nations defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that's something that I think still really resonates and is still the foundation of some pretty impactful sustainability work. Today, there are almost 140 developing countries in the world seeking ways of meeting their development needs sustainably. According to the UN, sustainable development requires an integrated approach that takes into consideration environmental concerns along with economic development. And that's why, before we dive deep, I wanted to just zoom out and look at this issue. Sustainability, broadly defined, includes environmental focus along with economic development. And sustainability within your own business might seem like something that you're just contending with at a very regional, hyper-focused level. But the work that you're doing, and the reason that you're doing the work that you're doing, when all rolled up, has a really big impact. So let's talk about sustainable development. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all UN member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which are an urgent call for action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. They recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. Wow, I mean, that's a lot. But before we get into the micro details of the things we can do within our businesses, I think it's really important to understand the broader perspective of sustainable development. And this may start to seem big and maybe a little bit overwhelming and maybe a little bit, pie in the sky, but I promise it'll come right back around to impacting our industry directly. And if you've already spent lots of time learning about the Sustainable Development Goals and working with them, I applaud you. Keep going. It's certainly an ambitious agenda, but if this is new information to you, I would encourage you to dive deeper into understanding the goals. So here's a very quick snapshot of these impactful Sustainable Development Goals. So there are 17 of them. Right after this slide, I'll take you through a quick video that by the United Nations that gives you an overview of these goals. Before we do that, what I think is really unique is if you're stopping for a moment or for an hour in your busy day and you're trying to reflect on how your business, your career, your life impacts global sustainability. I really believe that the hospitality and tourism industry has a place to both be grateful and then be impactful. Because if you look at these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, it's hard to find many, if any, that don't have some intersection with our industry, which essentially means we are uniquely positioned to be able to make a positive contribution towards global sustainable development because of the nature of our business. And that is really a place of privilege and a place of power that I think should motivate us to continue to work in this direction. Do I think each and every one of you are responsible for all these? No, of course not. But Canada plays a significant role in world leadership in terms of sustainability. Can we do more? Yes. Are we doing enough? No. But we're headed in the right direction. And look at these 17 sustainable development goals and see how much of what they're asking us to aim for has the potential to be impacted by what's happening within the hospitality and tourism industry and within your businesses. So Jillian is going to help me a little bit navigate some videos. I just want to show you a short video from the United Nations about the Sustainable Development Goals. We're just going to get that queued up for you here. Thank you, Jillian. Thank you so much for that. We're definitely ambitious as it relates to getting videos, but we want to make sure that this content is really valuable to you. Okay, so now we have a perspective on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's a lot to tackle. It can feel overwhelming, but it can also feel inspiring. Let's rotate a little, trying to avoid saying the word pivot, although now I just said pivot. But let's focus a little more on what sustainability programs are like that support the hospitality and tourism industry in 2022. It's kind of an interesting topic in that I think before the pandemic, as somebody who spent a lot of time advocating for the inclusion of sustainability, even within education programs that supported the hospitality and tourism industry, there was a lot of momentum. A lot of things were happening. We started to talk a lot about important issues like single-use plastics and sustainable food sources and energy sources. And some of that, to a certain extent, faded because of our focus on the pandemic as we started to really need to prioritize survival. So I'm optimistic that there can be another resurgence as we move forward. There are a couple of specific programs, and both are global in nature, that are very practical for you if you are working in the hospitality and tourism industry or the business industry. The first is a program called Green Key Global, and it's actually run by the Hotel Association of Canada. And yes, I know that hotels aren't all of the hospitality and tourism industry, but for any of you who are focused on this space, this is a really great program. And they actually focus on the hotel and meetings sector. So Green Key Global is a leading international environmental certification body that offers standardized programs and resources designed specifically for the hotel and meetings industry. There's a link right there to Green Key Global, and we'll show you a video in a second, but I just want to give you a reason. At the end of my discussions about the various hospitality programs, We're going to talk about why this matters. And Green Key Global, I think, has an immediate impact because, yes, the work that you're doing is impactful and meaningful as it relates to contributing to global sustainability. Yes. But there's also a key element here, which is in this program, you as an organization have the capacity to be given a bit of a designation. It's literally a number of keys, like a 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, but it's keys. And that gives you the ability to promote your sustainability programs to your guests. So we'll leave that as a bit of an Easter egg, and we'll get there in a second. But again, it's hard to do justice to a program as broad as Green Key Global. So I wanted to help you understand the program by showing a video. And this one is 60 seconds. It's literally in the name of the video is 60 seconds. So hoping Jillian can DJ that one up for us too. Got to get my go-to box out of the way. Okay, so great. Green Key Global is a program that you can access. There's a link there. You see the video if you're in the hotel and meeting industry. It's a really impactful program. Green Key Global is actually certified and accredited by a larger organization that I think is really important as a resource here. And this is the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. You see, the challenge with sustainability, especially we look about in terms of understanding the definition from the United Nations, diving into the Sustainable Development Goals, is to figure out how we actually work towards becoming sustainable, because there is a fairly large risk, and you see it in some of the tone of what's happening out there, that sustainability just becomes a marketing play. And there's a term that people use, greenwashing, that just says that you're creating this green image just to secure business, and it's not authentic. And so in order to really build around that, I think it's really important to understand where the resources are. So how does the hospitality and tourism industry achieve sustainability? Well, the GSTC is a great place to start. The GSTC establishes and manages global standards for sustainable travel and tourism, known as the GSTC criteria. I've reviewed them. They are tremendously in depth. There are two sets of criteria. There are sustainability criteria specifically for the destinations, for public policymakers, for influential government organizations. And then there's a set of industry criteria for tourism industry businesses. And they are the result of a worldwide effort to develop a common language about sustainability in tourism. That's exactly what we've been talking about. The GSTC criteria form the foundation accreditation for certification bodies that certify tourism businesses and destination as having sustainable policies and practices in place. GSTC themselves doesn't certify, but they accredit bodies that do certify. As we're navigating our way towards sustainability in the hospitality and tourism industry, and understanding already from the context of this conversation and everything else we already know that this is a very complex issue, having well-defined, well-thought-out criteria shaped ultimately by worldwide feedback, really helps us work towards achieving those goals. And the GSTC industry criteria and the suggested performance indicators for hospitality and tourism can be accessed online. See the link right at the bottom there, and form that solid foundation for mapping out and achieving sustainability. And they are arranged in 4 pillars that really excite me, actually, that provide a robust framework to understand and implement sustainability in tourism. It's the first one that got me really excited. Actually, it's the first one that got me calling Karen and saying, we got to talk about sustainability. So, the criteria in terms of achieving sustainability, the first pillar is around sustainable management. Wait a minute. Does that mean that we, as hospitality and tourism managers, business owners, entrepreneurs, team members, leaders, can make management decisions that impact sustainability? Yeah, absolutely it does. What it also means is it opens the windows for us to start to be able to develop the skills that are required to collectively achieve sustainability. So, as we're thinking about the future, again, pandemic notwithstanding, it created a moment for us to stop and pause that we aren't going to be able to move forward the same way that we were before. But I have a firm belief that when things start flowing again, that we will be in a place where we start to understand what are the skills required from entry level to senior executive. What are the skills required within the hospitality and tourism industry to achieve sustainability? And then we can start to focus on it. The other 3 pillars, socioeconomic impact, absolutely. We understand the economic impact of sustainability in the travel and tourism industry. What about the socioeconomic? What about community development? What about helping other people within the communities that we serve? Cultural impacts are so important, especially because so much of the tourism experience is central around hyper-local culture that needs to be preserved and needs to be celebrated in an authentic way, not in an inauthentic way. And then, of course, there they are, those environmental impacts. And it's kind of funny because when you really look at that, not that this is a ranking by any stretch, but the environmental impact of sustainability, which I think is the first thing on people's minds, is actually one of only 4 pillars that essentially shapes what sustainable hospitality and tourism look like. We got 2 more videos for you because this is an important one. Obviously, this is a global council and they've done a lot of work, so I wanted to give them the space to explain the GSTC to you. So we got a quick video, really nothing is more than a couple of minutes here. And so let's get Jillian on to play the video about GSTC, what they're all about and how you can access their resources. All right. So now you have a good sense of GSTC. So again, I promised tools and resources. Green Key Global is a great resource for you. GSTC is a great resource for you. These are resources specifically designed to support the hospitality and tourism industry, work towards and achieve overall sustainability. I want to talk about one item. I told you at the beginning when we touched on the agenda. If there's going to be one takeaway item that we can collectively kind of start working on and thinking about, it's reducing our carbon footprint. And I think it is one of the essential pieces that if we can really start to gain traction, and we've done a lot, there's a lot already moving along in this direction, but you'll start to understand the complexity and the potential impact of reducing our carbon footprint. So again, just wanted to give you a perspective because what we do in the hospitality and tourism industry, even though it seems hyper local within your region and within your business or within your career, what we do rolls up, it aggregates and forms a global tourism industry. So just briefly, the global tourism industry, pandemic notwithstanding, is a $1 trillion industry, and it's growing faster than international trade. There's a journal called Nature Climate Change. It's a journal dedicated to publishing the most significant and cutting edge research on the nature, underlying causes, or impacts of global climate change and its implication for the economy, policy, and the world at large. You'll see recurring theme of the things that I put together here. This is not just about environmentalism. That's a big part of it, but it's also about the economy and policy. According to a World First study in 2018, researchers identified that the carbon footprint of tourism is about 4 times larger than previously thought. And so again, if you're ever trying to reflect on whether what you're doing within your own career or your own business or your own community has an impact, what you're doing is part of such a big industry, and the practices that we are enabling do have a collective impact. These researchers work together to assess the entire supply chain of tourism. Think about that. The transportation, accommodations, food and beverages, souvenirs, clothing, cosmetics, everything that people buy along their tourism journey. Put together, global tourism produces about 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, much more than previous estimates. That is huge. That is significant. We kind of saw some of that happening during the pandemic when travel reduced and things reduced, that we actually started to see positive impacts on greenhouse gas emissions. It's just a fascinating moment in time to just observe what's happening. So just hang on a second. Why is the carbon footprint so important? Again, let's defer to the experts. Green Matters, another publication, frames the challenge really nicely. Carbon emissions are dangerous in that they threaten the livelihood of our planet, animals, humans, and ultimately life as we know it. The amount of carbon emissions trapped in our atmosphere causes global warming, which causes climate change, symptoms of which include melting of the polar ice caps, the rising sea levels, the disturbance of animals' natural habitats, extreme weather events, and so many more negative side effects that are dangerous to the planet, to human and animal life, and to our future. Now, really, this is not meant to be alarmist. And some of this may be landing with you and you're saying, yeah, maybe this is an over exaggeration. You can believe whatever you want to believe. But the point is, none of that is good for business. None of that is good for the hospitality and tourism industry. None of it. Humans, planets, the plant, sea levels, animals, we don't want all of that eroded if we want to grow a sustainable, robust hospitality and tourism industry in our businesses. So I think it's really important to understand that there may be some things we can do within our businesses, within our professional careers, that have a positive impact on the carbon footprint. And the driving force of why, well, first of all, let's start with because none of the negative impacts of climate change are positive for our businesses. There are a couple of practices that I think are worth noting. Remember, we're just focusing on reducing our carbon footprint for the moment. Let's talk about carbon offsetting. Carbon offsetting is something that's more and more commonplace, but I think often we hear about it and we talk about it, but how often do we pause and reflect on what it actually is? So, carbon offsetting is when companies are compensating for their greenhouse gas emissions by funding reforestation projects, usually in other parts of the world. This is not just big companies. Big companies do this, but small companies can do this too, and you can certainly do this. Carbon offsetting is a good approach to reducing our carbon footprint. It's not the best, but it's good. So there are actually many hospitality companies already investing in carbon offsetting. And again, we'll use a hotel company as an example. Coast Hotels and Resorts, they've been inviting guests to add $1 to their bill to purchase a night's carbon credit. And a carbon credit is essentially what carbon offsetting is. Guests and the company can take money and put it into reforestation projects that offset the amount of carbon used for that guest stay. They've been doing this since 2010. And you might be sitting there kind of saying, well, maybe that sounds like a marketing ploy, and maybe it is to a certain extent, but the investment in the carbon offsetting is the demonstration that we are taking this beyond marketing to actually making a positive impact. And my point here is, if carbon offsetting is new and it's something that you're focusing on right now, it's something that you can engage in, this should be celebrated. This is a great step in the right direction. But if we're going to achieve bigger, broader sustainability goals, there is an alternative to carbon offsetting that's worth considering. Excuse me. So as mentioned, if carbon offsetting is characterized by companies compensating for the greenhouse gas emissions by funding reforestation projects in other parts of the world, carbon insetting focuses on helping the ecosystems and communities which are directly impacted by a company's operation. Carbon insetting, we call it insetting because you're not offsetting and going to somewhere else around the world with your resources, which is fine. You're taking that responsibility on within your local community. And this is even more beneficial because obviously you have a direct impact of what's happening around you. So let's look at another example of carbon insetting. Accor Hotels, globally, huge company. And I'm using these big companies because it demonstrates the potential impact. They're taking these gestures a step further to sustain local livelihoods and build communities through an initiative called Plant for the Planet, which channels half of the hotel's laundry savings into reforestation projects which support local sustainable agriculture. Insetting is the guiding principle for Plant for the Planet, which was launched in 2019. This is going to be the next video that gives you a really good overview of what Accor is doing. Just as we watch this video, I would encourage you, don't focus too much on the branding and the scope of the hotel. Just try to follow the narrative and the actual impact of the differing approaches between carbon offsetting and carbon insetting, because the call to action here is, can you embrace carbon offsetting within your business? Could you find an organization internationally who's focusing on reforestation where you could potentially direct some resources, or have your guests, clients, customers direct their resources to buy those carbon credits and offset the impact? And or could you do carbon insetting? Is there something within your local community that you could actually contribute to, similar to what Accor did with Plant for the Planet, that impacts lowering that carbon impact on your local community? I'm just going to ask Jillian to line this up, and this will be our last video, but again, gives you a great perspective on things that are happening within our industry already. getting back online here. Get this guy out of the way. All right. So there you go. So the difference between carbon offsetting and carbon insetting is pretty interesting. And the impact of our collective efforts to reduce our carbon footprint have a very big contribution to sustainability and the sustainability goals. But this is about the business case for sustainability in hospitality and tourism. You've heard me talk about the economics of all of this and the socioeconomics. Why does sustainability matter to your business? Because it matters to your guests and it matters to your customers. And this is not just my opinion. This is another informed perspective. I wanted to share with you in a 2019 report produced by Skift. Skift is a great wealth of resources as it relates to research specifically focused on the hospitality and tourism industry globally. From the World Travel and Tourism Council's Global Summit in Seville, Spain, IHG Hotels and Resorts CEO Keith Barr stated, "I think the customer is actually out in front of government. I really believe that they are looking at us as operators or us as destinations or what kind of service you're providing and going, how are you delivering this to make sure you're more and more sustainable? I think as a hotel company and as a tourism industry, we have to get out in front about sustainability. That's single-use plastics, that's reducing carbon footprint, that's about building with more sustainable materials and understanding your ongoing impact on the environment. And so I think government will legislate, but in fact, businesses have to get out in front of it now. This is a very, very important message. There are more and more guests, customers, clients looking to support businesses that are sustainably minded. And you know what? The more transparent the world becomes with websites and social media and everything that you are all doing to try to get attention on your businesses, the more the guests and clients and customers have the capacity to actually determine whether what you're doing related to sustainability is authentic or inauthentic. So if none of the let's do this for the betterment of society, let's do this for the betterment of our future and for the betterment of our planet, if none of that particularly resonates with you or particularly moves you into action because of the place that you're in right now, maybe you should think about this. Can your business be positively impacted by your commitment to sustainability? And I say yes. Yes, it can. Regardless of how you arrive there, an elevated focus on sustainability within your business and your own capacity to demonstrate tangibly what you're doing to contribute to sustainability has a positive impact on the future potential of your business and of your business model. There's one last point here. It's actually Sustainable Development Goal number 8. And I kind of put it towards the end of my presentation because I think it's something that's really, really important for us to reflect on. People have always been at the center of our business. Here you are, we're talking about what we need to do to have a really great spring, summer season and recover from this industry, recover from the challenges of the pandemic. This industry requires people. People are our value proposition to our guests and clients. Not very many elements of hospitality and tourism can be delivered successfully or meaningfully without people. And yet we struggle. We are in a situation where we are facing, I think, a pretty existential crisis in terms of our workforce took a pretty hard hit over the pandemic. If you were at my labor discussion yesterday, our recruitment retention discussion yesterday, I framed the context quite simply as this. Just before the pandemic hit, Across this country, there were more than 2 million Canadians working in the hospitality and tourism industry. At our peak, at the peak of the pandemic, 800,000 of those people had been displaced. And even now, as things start to get better and we start to build towards the future that we want to fill, we still are looking at about 200,000 jobs without workers. I know you're feeling that pain. And even 200,000 jobs without workers does not accurately reflect the scope of the talent shortage that we had before we got into this pandemic. United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 8, quite simply, is decent work and economic growth. And I say this because this is a measure of how you can create the conditions designed by or defined by the UN as decent work within your businesses, which I think is a pretty low bar. Being decent is pretty low, and it's a threshold that we should all be able to work towards. So let's just review this together. SDG 8 is defined by the UN as promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. Over the past 25 years, the number of workers living in extreme poverty has declined dramatically, despite the lasting impact of the 2008 economic crisis and the 2019 pandemic and the global recession. In developing countries, the middle class now makes up more than 34% of total employment, a number that has almost tripled between 1991 and 2015. The SDGs promote sustained economic growth, higher levels of productivity and technological innovation, encouraging entrepreneurship and job creation, both of which are heavily present in our industry, are key to this, as are effective measures to eradicate forced labor, slavery, and human trafficking. With these targets in mind, the goal is to achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men by 2030. That is a pretty comprehensive overview of decent work, but if you're looking for a measure of how you can create decent work and decent work conditions, believe it or not, people, the labor challenges that we are facing right now are actually just one element of building sustainable hospitality and tourism and contributing broadly to sustainable goals. I want to take just a few minutes as we wrap up this presentation to refresh on reinvention. And why does that matter? It matters because the future we're trying to create does not resemble the past. And we ought to find it within ourselves to recognize that the hotel, restaurant, hospitality, and tourism businesses that were inherited from previous generations were not necessarily designed to create a sustainable future. And it gives us the capacity to reinvent the hospitality and tourism industry, repeat, reiterate, revisit the original ideas. And the original ideas are centered around the concepts of hospitality and tourism. How do you thrive in an era of disruption? You reinvent. Change is everywhere, and it's coming for us fast. I have a firm belief that there are 3 components of reinvention. If you're going to focus on this, focus on these 3 things. Resilience is the strength and speed of our response to adversity, always present in change, transformation, reinvention. Adaptive capacity is the ability of an individual or a group to realize change. Not everybody can, but if you're sitting here and paying attention to training, focusing on the industry, you can and you have that capacity. Vulnerability is embracing an environment of uncertainty, risk, and exposure. Why does reinvention matter to hospitality and tourism? Because the surest way to stay true to who you are, company, brand, or individual, is to reinvent so as to continually become the most powerful and relevant version of yourself. Why that matters, I'm not saying out with the old, in with the new. I'm saying we need you to be the most powerful and relevant version of yourself right here, right now. 2022 and beyond, we've heard the rhetoric of building back better. Stop, pause, reflect, learn. What does that actually mean? You now have a roadmap to work towards sustainability. And at the same time, you can understand that hospitality is centered around care. What is the original idea? Flash back to that flyer of my grandfather. Come into our restaurant, eat food, stay. It's the most luxurious, interesting place in Western Canada. The goal was to take care of those guests and clients. And the nature of the tourism business. Tourism is about tour and ism. Isms are a way of being. And when you're on a tour, you're ultimately in movement. The original idea of the hospitality and tourism industry is about taking care of people in movement. And the opportunity in front of us right now is to revisit how we can best do that with sustainability in mind. And why? Because we can't do this alone. We are in this together. And if you ever needed a reminder or a blueprint or a place to see how interconnected everything is, it's all around us. A closing quote from Bob Hunter. Ecology is the thing. In nature, nothing exists alone. And that includes you along your journey towards sustainable hospitality and tourism. It's been a real pleasure spending time with you today. I know we covered a lot of ground. I hope it was valuable to you. You certainly have lots to think about and lots of resources to dig into. If something makes sense to you and you would like to reach out to me, this is how you find me. You find me at the Joe Baker. It's not even an email address. It's just a handle because that's easier, and you can find me on all platforms. Love to hear your perspective. And I'll just ask Karen to pop on. I know we really only have a couple of minutes if there are any questions, but if we can't get to questions now, we can certainly handle those over email later on. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your efforts. Thank you for your energy. You are making a difference, and collectively we can achieve sustainable hospitality and tourism together. Thank you.
Hi, Joe. Amazing presentation. I think you've given us all so much to think about and reflect on. I do have one comment here from Maya who says, excellent, so much needed. No one-time use at our establishment. We found a way despite COVID. Money saving ripple effect and customer appreciation was the result we saw. I don't have any questions that have come in, Joe. So unless somebody has one that the next minute or two, that's great, we can take that. But otherwise, as Joe said, feel free to connect with him offline. He's giving you the coordinates with which to do that, and Jillian has popped that into the chat. Thanks so much, Jillian. Michelle says, Chi merci, big thank you, amazing and positive. Great, thanks, Michelle. All right, I would like to say merci, miigwech, and thank you to all of you who have joined us this afternoon for taking time out of your busy schedules to partake in this afternoon session. We really do appreciate it. And Joe, thank you for sharing your expertise and insight, just completely invaluable. Always appreciated. We enjoyed your webinar yesterday and today's as well. So if you have any questions for Joe, want to connect directly with him, it is in the chat there of how to do so. Next up this afternoon at 3 p.m. is lending opportunities and programs for tourism-based businesses, brought to you by the CFTC and BDC. So we'll see you at 3 today. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.